What's up, everybody? Welcome to another Humminbird Minn Kota Angler Spotlight. I'm BrandonPalaniuk. I was born and raised in northern Idaho, which is where we're at right now, enjoying a little bit of time on the water. And I've been fishing professionally for 10 years now. I know it may not look like it for those of you that don't know, but it's true. It's been 10 years. I'm now becoming one of the old guys. So we have got a bunch of questions from many of you guys out there. We sent it out there on social, told you guys to send in your questions for me, and I've got a list of them here. So I'm just gonna run through some of those questions and do my best to answer them for you guys, and hopefully you guys learn a little bit, either about me, about fishing, about the products, whatever it may be. So let's get started. This first one is from Brian. Brian wants to know, what is your thought process between switching lures or moving, and how do you decide what to do? This is probably one of the toughest questions to answer in the sport of fishing because it's so vague and it's so situational. And it's probably also one of the most common questions because it's a very important thing, right? It's something that's hard to understand, and a lot of it just comes down to a gut feeling. And the reason I say it's situational is the fact that all of the factors that go into why those fish were there or are there can change, and then that's going to change the conditions. The fish may change, and so knowing that, you have to look at what are the factors that changed. Was it a factor that would cause those fish to move, right, like a rising or a falling water? Or was it something just as simple as sunny versus cloudy weather that may just need to change your approach to how you target those fish in the same area? So always try to identify what caused the change if you're not catching them like you were. And then once you identify that, try to make those right adjustments. And if you have to, don't be afraid to move. It's always easier to leave and then come back later if you don't find them somewhere else. Our next question is from Bud, my buddy Bud. He is from Featherwick. He wants to know, would you prefer to be known as the Grande Triangulator or the Supreme Bite Inducer? Oh, that's a good one, Bud. I think, I do like Grande Triangulator, but I think I would have to be the Supreme Bite Inducer. That sounds pretty solid. And there could be a lot that goes with the Supreme Bite Inducer. This one says Anonymous Pro Angler sent this one in. I'm really curious on who that was. This says, is the Storm Arashi Glide bait your favorite giant bass bait? When and how do you throw it? I feel like if that question is sent in by an anonymous pro angler, they're trying to get the goods. Well, I'm gonna give you guys some of the goods. Yes, it is my favorite big bass bait, or my favorite way to catch larger than average fish in any body of water. Now, with that being said, there are certain situations that it comes into play more than others, right? Where I've got cleaner water versus dirty water, things like that. There's conditions that Arashi Glide bait just plays more than others. But if I can throw it and I can get away with catching fish on it, that's gonna be my go-to. And when I'm throwing it, I mean, this could be an hour and a half, 2 hour long seminar just on throwing that glide bait. The thing you gotta keep in mind is I'm always looking for some sort of ambush point, whether it's a dock, a laydown, a long point, a bluff wall, somewhere where those fish have easy access to ambush the prey, where they don't have to move super far, and I can keep that bait in the strike zone, sliding side to side. Doesn't matter the time of year. I've caught them in water in the 40s, caught them in water up in the 90s, you know, so water temperature, not that big of a deal. Water clarity, yeah, my favorite is probably that 3 to 4 foot range of visibility. That's when the fish seem to get positioned up the best to be able to eat that. You know, and just the clearer the water you have, the further they can come from, but also the better they can see the bait. So you got to do some little tricks to be able to get them to bite it and make sure you're making long casts. And I've caught them in as dirty of water as 6 inches. So, you know, you can do a lot of things there with it. Next one, what's your biggest 5-fish bag in a pro derby? I would have to say, I think it's 26. 2 years ago at the St. Lawrence River, I caught a mega bag of giant smallmouth. And I think that's my biggest one. I had like another 25-ish or something, I think at Falcon. It was so long ago, I can barely remember. Our next question is from Chris R. Best advice for someone who is looking to start tournament fishing? Man, Chris, I don't know how old you are. If I'm giving somebody advice on that topic, it's really just start out within your means, right? Within your budget, and don't be afraid to start local. Start small, work your way up. Even don't be afraid to fish as a co-angler if you don't have a boat, because you're going to learn. And when you're starting out, learning is the #1 thing that you need to be focused on. If you have the ability to just start fishing young, if you have a family member that fishes, start fishing club tournaments. Find a local club. Start getting your feet wet in that competition aspect. That timely order that's going to make you have to make decisions on a time clock, right? 8 hours. What are my decisions going to be? I got to make all the right decisions in that 8-hour period. And then if you have the chance, fish high school, fish college. If not, if you're older than that, go and fish the Bass Nation, or what used to be called the Bass Federation Nation. That's how I came up. Won the national championship in 2010, and that's what qualified me for the Bassmaster Elite Series and my first Bassmaster Classic. So that's always a phenomenal route. If you can get the time off from work and you can afford it, the Bassmaster Opens are another great option. Our next question comes from Brad Watley, another one of my Elite Series buddies. What is the one memory that you have made so far in professional fishing that stands out the most to you? Oh, that's a tough one, Brad. I've had so many amazing things happen in my career that I don't know if I could pick just one, but the first one that comes to mind right now would be Sam Rayburn, 2017, when I won AOI, but I ended up winning at Rayburn. But the final day, a lot of my fish had moved where I had been catching them. When that wind switched direction, it changed how they positioned, and I think just a lot of them moved. We were in that transition period where they were going from shallow to deep, and at 2:36, I landed a 515. And what I didn't know then that I found out later was that literally 2 minutes before that, Ayler had caught a 515 and taken the lead. And then 2 minutes later at 2:36, I caught that 515, and it was on a new place that I hadn't fished all week and that I just idled over. I saw the fish on my Humminbird side imaging. I could see how those fish were positioned, and when those fish were positioned facing the brush pile, I knew they were aggressive. And when I idled by that one, I saw it and immediately spun around and started catching them on a 10-inch worm. And at 2:36, I remember yelling it out, because the reason 2:36 was so significant was that I was almost out of time. I had to check in at like 2:45. So that is probably the most memorable one that comes to mind right off the bat. Let's see, this next question is from Austin H. I'm picking up a Humminbird 360 NonMega tomorrow. What are 3 tips to help me get the most out of it? Great question, Austin. The biggest thing that you need to think about is think of it as your side imaging sonar, right? It's giving you a very similar picture to side imaging, but it's allowing you to shoot out in front. Now, one thing that I like to do is I either like to run front mode so that it's using the most of the screen space available, or if I want to be able to see 360 degrees, then I like to zoom in at least one time so that it fills that screen a little bit more. That's going to help with the detail, and it's just going to help see those images a little bit cleaner and crisper. The next thing is don't be afraid to play with your color palettes. I prefer to run color palette number 4. It's the brown palette. That just seems to give me the most detail. But what you need to do with that, and this would be my third tip, is don't be afraid to play with your sensitivity and your contrast. Different bottom contours will require different sensitivity and contrast to really get the most clarity out of it. I like to run mine somewhere in that range of 13 to 15 for my sensitivity and probably 12 to 14 on my contrast, just a little bit less than that sensitivity. And that'll give you the best detail that I've found on 360, either Mega or non-traditional. Mega, there's a few more like tweaks that you can do in there just because there's more things available in it. From Jordan C, best baits to use when bass are transitioning from pre-spawn to spawn. This would go back to my earlier one about the Storm Arashi Glide bait. One of my favorite ones when they're going pre-spawn to spawn. Those big females are pushing up, they're aggressive, they're still hungry, and you can just catch so many, and they're moving shallow so you can cover a lot of water with that bait. You know, as long as conditions allow, I'm throwing that bait because it's one of the most fun ways to catch the biggest fish in a body of water. Our next question coming from Jacob S. Jacob wants to know, what lure would you want to have that is not in production anymore? Man, that is a good one. Ooh, I would have to say, gosh, I would probably like, it's not even really that old of a lure, but I would really like some more, is the Storm Arashi rattling version of the Square 3 and the Square 5. They still make the silent, but they don't make the rattling version anymore. And there's some dirty water situations where that crankbait really shines early in the year. And in those dirty water situations, I like to have that rattle sometimes just to get that reaction strike, give those fish something to key in on. So that would probably be my choice. I know it's probably not what you expected. It's not a super old lure, but I would love to have that. I've still got some in my box that I use, and it'd just be a great one to have back in production. Next question from Adam S. Adam asked us, any tips for minimizing hangups when fishing bottom baits around riprap and rocks? It's a great question, Adam. There are some things you can do. The number one thing is probably use the lightest weight possible on whatever bait you're throwing. So whether it's a football jig, whether that's a shaky head, using the lightest weight you can get away with and still keep contact in the bottom will minimize that trying to slide into those cracks and things like that. So that's probably the biggest tip. And if you're having trouble keeping those lighter baits on the bottom, don't be afraid to lighten up your line. That'll help keep that bait on the bottom. You know, the higher the weight pound test you have, it's gonna wanna hold that up. So a lot of times if I'm throwing a football jig, I'll throw a 3/8 and I'll go down to say like a Seagar and VizX 15-pound test. That's gonna help keep that bait down, but still have enough strength that you have no problems landing those fish. Next question. G-Man Gerald Swindle. Who jumped off the first rock at Havasu? I remember this well. There's some footage of this out there. Me and old Gerald Swindle, after our Elite Series event on Havasu a few years ago, decided to go do some cliff jumping. And if I remember right, I think he did jump off the rock first. I will give him that. I will give you that, G. Next question from Monty W. Do I get a Minn Kota trolling motor with built-in MDI, which is going to be mega down imaging, or save the extra cost and install a transducer? Phenomenal question. Monty, if it was my choice, I would go with the built-in Mega DI transducer. I think that transducer is the best one that Minn Kota's ever built for up front. It's got the most clarity, either on the DI and on the 2D side of it. And it's more sleek and more protected. So you're gonna have less hangups in grass, less chance of hitting it and knocking it off at an angle, if you're in some stumps and things like that. So for me, if I was gonna choose, I would go with the built-in Mega DI. Next question, Kyle V. Most of you probably know who Kyle V is. Does a lot of the filming for me. Let's see what he's got. Did you sing karaoke in Japan? Well, Kyle, I could ask you the same question. I may have sung along to some karaoke, may have heard you sing a little, let's see, what was it? Garth Brooks, Friends in Low Places? Yeah, in Japan, that happened. It's out there now. It's your own fault, Kyle. Our next question coming from Tyler K. What do you like the most about your Ultrex trolling motor? Gonna have to be Spot Lock, the OG Spot Lock trolling motor. Spot Lock has changed so much in the way that we're able to be efficient when we're fishing offshore. You know, just retying on a spot, not getting drifted off of it, being able to make that cast, keep your angles, stay lined up. And when you pair that with 360, it's so nice to be able to just lock that trolling motor in. I can cast off to the side, I can cast backwards with the wind, fish off the back of the boat. So Spot Lock would have to be the best thing. You know, if I just had to pick one, it's gonna be Spot Lock. Next question coming from TrentE. What is the dirtiest water you will throw a glide bait in? So, awesome question, Trent. For me, when I'm talking about swim baits, especially glide baits, water clarity is always a thing of kind of depending on the fish's mood, right? It's all relevant. So think about this. If a fish is in a foot of water and they have 6 inches of visibility, they can see half the water column. If that fish is in 10 foot of water and they've only got 6 inches of visibility, they can't see very much. So the deeper the fish are positioned, the more clarity I need. But if those fish are up shallow, they can find that bait. It's a big bait, especially the Storm Arashi Glide bait. It's gonna push a lot of water. Those fish can feel it, they can see it. You know, just make sure you select one of the colors like Okiwamisu or something that's got some good opaque colors that those fish are gonna be able to see, and you can catch them in that dirtier water. Our next question is coming from RichSea. He asks, what settings are you using for the Mega 360 imaging that are different from the original 360? So one thing that I noticed, the biggest difference is just Mega in general, using Mega. If you've got Solix units, you can actually switch back and forth between 455 kilohertz and Mega. So having that Mega capability, I know it's obvious, but that's one of the biggest differences that I'm using. The other is it has a feature called dynamic contrast. Now I don't use that as much on Mega because the Mega imaging tends to be a little bit darker and it's not shooting out as far as 455. So I actually turn the dynamic contrast off. But when I do switch to 455, and I do sometimes when I'm just trying to cover a lot of water and I want to be able to scan out there a long ways, I will use that dynamic contrast because I think it adds a little bit more clarity in the 455 than was available in the older version. I'm still running color palette number 4. The settings are just slightly different, right? I don't have my sensitivity and my contrast up as high with the Mega as I did with the older one. So not a lot of changes, but there are a couple just minor tweaks here and there that help me see and help me use that Mega a little bit better. The biggest thing that I've noticed with the Mega is the detail separation that you get. So you're able to see fish better, especially when they're around some type of cover. You can see them in the shadows, you can see them suspended, and you can see them moving around. And that's really been the biggest difference that I've seen with Mega versus the older 455 models. Thank you guys for tuning in to another one of these Humminbird Minn Kota Angler Spotlights. You guys rock. Thanks for sending in your questions. There will be more of these coming up, so make sure you guys stay tuned, follow Minn Kota and Humminbird on their social channels so you can get your questions in. Thank you guys. If you guys want to follow along with me, You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter. All of it is at BrandonPalaniuk. And you can check it out on YouTube at BMP Fishing. So thank you guys very much for hanging out here again on another one of the Humminbird Minn Kota Angler Spotlights.